The crystal goblet felt dangerously fragile in my hand, the condensation slipping against my thumb as I tried to steady the tremor that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with the rage simmering in my gut. It was the smell of the room that always got to me first at the Vanderbilt Christmas dinner, a suffocating mix of expensive pine candles, roast duck, and the cloying, powdery scent of my mother-in-law Eleanor's perfume. It was a scent that screamed old money, or at least the desperate pretense of it. I was sitting at the far end of the mahogany table, the spot usually reserved for children or unwanted guests, picking at a dry piece of artisan bread while the conversation flowed around me like a river diverting around a stone. They were talking about summer homes in the Hamptons, the decline of the stock market, and the utter tragedy of finding good help these days. And then, as if on cue, the silence fell. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but heavy, waiting to be filled with something sharp. Eleanor cleared her throat. It was a delicate, practiced sound, like dry leaves skittering on pavement. She turned her gaze toward me, her eyes glassy and hard, rimmed with kohl that had begun to smudge into the wrinkles she fought so hard to hide. "Nina, dear," she began, her voice dripping with that faux sweetness that usually preceded evisceration. "I was speaking with the gals at the club today. They were asking about Mark's little situation." I felt Mark stiffen beside me. He took a long sip of his wine, his eyes fixed on the centerpiece of holly and ivy, refusing to look at me. My husband, the man who promised to protect me? "What situation is that, Eleanor?" I asked, keeping my voice level, though my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. She smiled, a tight stretching of lips that didn't reach her eyes. "The situation, darling. Everyone is just so confused. They see a bright, handsome man like my Mark, a Vanderbilt by blood, if not by bank account right now, and they see, well, they see you." She gestured vaguely at my outfit, a simple, elegant black dress that cost more than her entire living room set, though she didn't know that. She thought it was from a discount rack because I didn't wear labels on the outside. "A waitress," she spat the word like it was a slur. "A girl who serves coffee. A gold digger who got her claws into a vulnerable man during a rough patch." The table erupted in titters. Mark's sisters, Clara and Beatrice, covered their mouths with napkins to hide their smirks. "We're just worried, Nina," Clara added, swirling her drink. "We want Mark to be happy, to be with someone who understands our world, someone worthy." That was the trigger, the word worthy. It hung in the air, vibrating with 3 years of insults, 3 years of being ignored, mocked, and treated like the dirt beneath their designer heels. Eleanor leaned forward, emboldened by her daughter's support. "So I'll just ask what we're all thinking. When are you leaving my son so he can find someone worthy? How much will it cost to make you go away?" The room went dead silent. I looked at Mark. He was staring at his plate, his knuckles white as he gripped his fork. He said nothing, absolutely nothing. A strange calm washed over me. It was the calm of a soldier who realizes the war is over, and they are the only one left standing. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached my eyes, because I knew something they didn't. I reached under my chair and pulled out my tote bag. From it, I extracted 5 thick, cream-colored envelopes. I stood up, the wood of the chair scraping loudly against the parquet floor, and walked around the table. I placed one envelope in front of Eleanor, one in front of Elora, one for Beatrice, one for Mark's father, Robert, who had been asleep with his eyes open for most of the meal, and finally, one for Mark. "Open them," I said softly. Eleanor scoffed, picking up the envelope with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "What is this? A resignation letter? A menu?" She tore the seal. I watched her eyes scan the document inside. I watched the color drain from her face, turning her skin the color of old parchment. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish on a hook. It was a deed to this very house, the ancestral Vanderbilt estate they were so proud of. And attached to it were bank statements. 3 years of bank statements. Eleanor stammered, her hands shaking so badly the papers rattled. This says the mortgage is paid in full. Yes, I said, leaning against the table, crossing my arms. By me. Clara ripped hers open. Wait, the LLC that bought the debt? Phoenix Holdings? That's you? That's me, I confirmed. I've been paying your mortgage for 3 years, Eleanor, ever since the bank threatened foreclosure because you spent the family fortune on appearances. I bought the debt. I paid the taxes. I kept the lights on so you could sit here and mock me for serving tables. I turned to Mark. He was staring at the papers, his face a mask of horror. He knew I had some money. I'd told him I had savings, but he didn't know I was Phoenix Holdings. He didn't know I was the silent investor behind the tech startup that had exploded 5 years ago, the one that allowed me to Waitress simply because I liked the human connection and wanted to stay grounded. You called me a gold digger, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. But I'm the only reason you still have a roof over your head. I'm the only reason you aren't on the street. Eleanor looked up, tears of humiliation welling in her eyes. Nina, I didn't know. You didn't ask, I replied coldly. You saw an apron and assumed I was nothing. You saw kindness and assumed it was weakness. I looked at Mark one last time. He looked small, pathetic. A man who let his mother abuse his wife because he was too afraid to lose his inheritance, an inheritance that didn't even exist anymore. I'm keeping the house, I announced, my voice ringing with finality. It's in my name, legal and binding. You have 30 days to vacate. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. They're your family, Mark. Take them with you. Maybe you can find someone worthy to support them now. But wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. The adrenaline is still coursing through my veins as I sit here in my car, the engine idling, watching the snow fall on the windshield. The look on Eleanor's face? God, I need to bottle that. But to understand why that moment was so sweet, so incredibly necessary, you have to understand how I ended up there. How a tech multimillionaire ended up slinging hash browns at a diner and marrying a man who couldn't stand up to his mommy. Let me rewind. Let me take you back to the beginning, before the envelopes, before the insults, back to the smell of burnt coffee and the day Mark walked into the Rusty Spoon and changed my life, for better and for worse. It was raining that day. Not a romantic, movie-style drizzle, but a hard, gray downpour that turned the New York streets into rivers of sludge. I was behind the counter at the Rusty Spoon, a diner in Brooklyn that have seen better decades, let alone better days. I was wearing a uniform that was 2 sizes too big, smelling of bacon grease and maple syrup, my hair tied back in a messy bun that was more mess than bun. And I was happy, truly. See, what none of the customers knew, what even my coworkers didn't know, was that 6 months prior, I had sold a proprietary algorithm to a major logistics firm for a sum that had 8 zeros in it. I was 24 years old, and I never had to work another day in my life. But the money, it scared me. It felt isolating. I had grown up with nothing, raised by a single mom who worked 3 jobs. When the money hit my account, I froze. I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't move to a penthouse. I put it all in diversified trusts and investments, and I kept my job at the diner. I needed the grounding. I needed to remember what it felt like to have sore feet and to earn a tip. I wanted to be liked for me, not for my net worth. Then Mark walked in. He looked like a drowned rat in a bespoke suit. He sat at booth 4, the one with the rip in the vinyl seat repaired with duct tape. He looked devastated. He ordered a black coffee and stared out the window for an hour. I felt a tug in my chest, that dangerous, empathetic tug that has always been my Achilles heel. I walked over with the coffee pot. "Rough day?" I asked, topping off his mug. He looked up, and his eyes were the color of the ocean after a storm. Gray, turbulent, beautiful. "You could say that," he sighed. "My family, they're intense." We started talking. He told me he was an architect, true, that he loved old buildings, true, and that he felt trapped by his family's expectations, very, very true. He didn't ask about me, really. He assumed I was just the waitress. And for a while, I let him. It was refreshing. He liked my jokes. He liked the way I listened. He fell in love with Nina the waitress, and I fell in love with the vulnerable, artistic man who seemed so different from the stuffy world he described. We dated for 6 months before he introduced me to them. The Vanderbilts. The name carried weight in the city, though I knew from my financial research, old habits die hard, that their liquidity was drying up. They were house rich and cash poor, leveraging debt to maintain an illusion of Gilded Age splendor. But Mark didn't know I knew. He was terrified to introduce me. "They can be critical," he warned me as we drove up the winding driveway to their estate in Westchester. "Just be yourself. But maybe don't mention the diner right away." That hurt. It was the first red flag, the first little crack in the foundation. But I loved him. I brushed it off. I thought, I can handle snobs. I've handled venture capitalists and tech bros. A few old ladies in pearls won't break me. I was wrong. The first dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. I wore a vintage floral dress I loved. Eleanor looked at it and asked if I had made it myself out of curtains. When Mark finally mumbled that I worked in the service industry, the air left the room. Eleanor had actually put down her fork and stared at me as if I had confessed to a felony. "A waitress?" she repeated. "How quaint. And do you have plans to educate yourself, to do something meaningful?" I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. "I find serving people meaningful," I said. "It's honest work." Eleanor had laughed then, a dry, tinkling sound. "Honest, yes, like a plow horse is honest." Mark didn't defend me. He just drank his wine and changed the subject to the weather. That should have been the moment I walked out. That should have been the end. But I was stubborn. And I was in love with the idea of saving him. I thought if I just loved him enough, if I was patient enough, he would find his backbone. I thought I could be the buffer between him and them, so I stayed. I endured the holidays, the birthdays, the constant, dripping faucet of their disdain. They called me the help when they thought I wasn't listening. They made jokes about checking the silverware before I left. And all the while, I watched their financial house of cards crumble. About a year into our marriage, I overheard a phone call. Mark was shouting in his study. His father had gambled away another chunk of their equity, and the bank was calling in the loan on the main estate. They were 3 months away from foreclosure. Mark was sobbing. He was going to lose his childhood home, his legacy. He felt like a failure. I sat on the other side of the door, my heart breaking for him. I couldn't tell him the truth about my money. Not then. It had gone on too long. If I told him now, he'd wonder why I tested him. He'd feel betrayed. Or worse, he'd look at me the way his mother looked at her bank account, as a resource. So I went behind his back. I contacted my lawyers. I set up Phoenix Holdings. I bought their distressed mortgage from the bank for a lump sum, negotiating a deal the bank couldn't refuse because they wanted the toxic asset off their books. I became their landlord. I became the owner of the roof over their heads, the very walls that housed their insults. Every month, I authorized the payments. Every time Eleanor sneered at my cheap shoes, I was paying for the floor she stood on. Every time Clara made a joke about me needing tips, I was funding her heating bill. It was a twisted sort of power, I admit, a secret armor. It allowed me to smile through the abuse because I knew the truth. I owned them. But the armor was getting heavy. 3 years of it. 3 years of Mark shrinking further and further away, becoming more like his father, silent, complicit, weak. The man I met in the diner was gone. replaced by a man who was so desperate for his mommy's approval that he let her shred his wife into confetti. The gold digger comments were becoming more frequent, more vicious. They were projecting their own financial desperation onto me. They needed me to be the villain so they could feel superior. Which brings us to tonight, Christmas Eve. I had spent all week preparing myself. I knew it was coming. Eleanor had been hinting about Mark's high school ex-girlfriend, a debutante named Victoria, all month. I knew she was planning a strike. I just didn't know how hard she would hit. When she said, "When are you leaving my son?" something inside me snapped. It wasn't a hot snap like a rubber band. It was a cold snap like an icicle breaking. I realized I didn't love Mark anymore. You can't love someone you don't respect. And I couldn't respect a man who watched his wife bleed out emotionally and did nothing but check his watch. So I brought the envelopes. I had them prepared months ago, just in case. The nuclear option, my lawyer called it. I hoped I wouldn't have to use them. I hoped that maybe, just maybe, this Christmas would be different. That Mark would stand up. That Eleanor would say thank you for the gift I brought. A scarf, hand-knit, which she probably threw in the trash. But hope is a dangerous thing when you're dealing with vipers. Now, sitting in the cold car, I feel light. Dizzyingly light. I can see the lights of the house flickering in the rearview mirror. My house. I wonder what they're doing in there. Are they screaming? Is Eleanor fainting? Is Mark finally finding his voice? Or is he just crying into his wine? I don't care. That's the most shocking realization of all. I don't care. I'm going to drive back to the city. I'm going to go to the Rusty Spoon, even though I don't work there anymore. I'm going to order a black coffee and a slice of cherry pie, and then I'm going to start my life. My real life. The one where I don't have to hide who I am. The one where I'm not a waitress, or a gold digger, or a disappointment. I'm Nina, and I'm the landlord. The silence inside my car was heavy. A physical weight pressing against my eardrums, contrasting sharply with the chaotic symphony of snow crunching under my tires and the rhythmic, frantic swishing of the windshield wipers. I didn't go to the Rusty Spoon. I couldn't. The idea of bright fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee, which usually brought me comfort, suddenly felt exposing. I needed somewhere dark, somewhere anonymous. I needed to disappear. My hands were shaking so violently that I had to pull over onto the shoulder of the highway, just a few miles away from the Vanderbilt estate. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned the color of bone, gasping for air, the adrenaline crash hitting me like a physical blow. It wasn't triumph I was feeling, not yet. It was nausea. It was the sickening, hollow realization that I had just nuked my entire life. I had blown up my marriage, my home, and my future in the span of 5 minutes with 5 cream-colored envelopes. I leaned my forehead against the cold leather of the steering wheel and let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. It was over. The charade, the biting my tongue, the shrinking myself to fit into their narrow, dusty little world, it was all finally over. Then the phone started. It buzzed against the passenger seat like an angry hornet. Mark. I stared at the screen, watching his face, a photo I'd taken of him on our honeymoon in escaped laughter, light up the dark cabin. I didn't answer. It went to voicemail. It rang again immediately. And again. On the 4th try, a morbid curiosity took over. I wanted to hear his voice. I wanted to know if he was calling to apologize, to tell me he was packing his bags and coming with me, to tell me he loved me and that his mother was a monster. I slid the icon to green and put it on speaker, my breath hitching in my throat. "Nina!" His voice filled the car, but it wasn't the voice of the man I loved. It was high-pitched, shrill, laced with a panic that sounded pathetic. "Where are you? You can't just drop a bomb like that and leave. Mother is having palpitations. Beatrice is crying." I closed my eyes, a single tear tracking a hot path down my cheek. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry." just concern for them. I told you, Mark, I said, my voice sounding surprisingly steady, detached, like I was speaking from underwater. I'm leaving. I'm done. Is it true? He demanded, ignoring my words. The papers? The mortgage? How the hell did you get that kind of money? You're a waitress, Nina. Did you steal it? Is this some kind of illegal scheme? My mother is threatening to call the police. I laughed then, a dry, rasping sound. Let her call them, Mark. It's all documented. Phoenix Holding, it's my money. Money I earned before I ever met you. Money I hid because I was afraid people would only love me for what I could buy them. Turns out, I was right to be afraid. You lied to me, he hissed. The accusation hung in the air, thick and toxic. For 3 years, you lied to me. You watched us struggle. You watched me stress about the bills, about the estate, and you sat on a pile of cash? That's sociopathic, Nina. I didn't watch you struggle, I shot back, the anger finally flaring up, burning through the sadness. I paid the bills. I fixed the roof. I paid for your sister's tuition through anonymous grants. I saved you, Mark. And I didn't say anything because I wanted you to stand up for me because I was your wife, not because I was your bank. I wanted to be worthy to you without the price tag. There was a silence on the line, but it wasn't a thoughtful silence. It was the silence of a man calculating his next move. Okay, he said, his voice dropping, trying to sound reasonable, trying to charm me the way he used to. Okay, babe, look, you made your point. You have money. That's great, actually. We can fix this. Just come back. We can explain it to Mother. If you explain that you can support the estate, she'll treat you differently. She just worries about security. Come back and we can talk about how to manage the assets. My stomach turned over. He didn't get it. He saw the envelopes and he didn't see his wife's pain. He saw a lifeline for his fading heritage. He saw a way to keep the country club membership and the summer galas. He was willing to prostitute his dignity and our marriage for the sake of keeping his mother comfortable. No, Mark, I whispered, the finality of it settling in my bones. She won't treat me differently. She'll just hate me more for having the power she lost. And you'll just resent me for saving you. You have 30 days. The eviction notice is real. I hung up. I blocked his number. Then I blocked Eleanor, Clara, Beatrice, and Robert. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat and put the car in gear. I didn't cry anymore. I felt hollowed out, like a pumpkin carved for Halloween, empty and grinning a rictus grin at the dark highway. I drove into the city, the skyline of Manhattan rising like a jagged, glittering promise in the distance. I didn't go to my old apartment, the small, cozy walk-up in Queens that Mark and I had shared, the one filled with our wedding photos and the cheap IKEA furniture we'd assembled together. I couldn't face the ghosts there. Instead, I drove to Columbus Circle. I pulled up to the valet at the Mandarin Oriental. My car, a sensible 5-year-old sedan that fit the Waitress narrative, looked absurd next to the Bentleys and G-Wagons idling in the driveway. The valet, a young man in a crisp uniform, hesitated for a split second when he saw me. I didn't blame him. I was wearing a simple black dress, now wrinkled, and a coat that had seen better days. I looked like I was there to deliver a food order, not to check in. I walked into the lobby, the scent of white tea and expensive lilies washing over me, replacing the lingering smell of Eleanor's cloying perfume. I approached the reception desk. The woman behind the marble counter looked up, her smile professional but tight, her eyes scanning my appearance and making a quick, dismissive assessment. "Can I help you, miss? Deliveries are around a back." It was the same tone Eleanor used, the same assumption. You don't belong here. But this time, I didn't shrink. I didn't smile and apologize. I reached into my purse, the tattered tote bag that had held the deeds, and pulled out my wallet. I slid a heavy, black titanium card across the marble. The Centurion card. The black card. It makes a specific sound when it hits stone, a heavy, metallic clack that commands attention. The receptionist stopped. She looked at the card, then up at me, her eyes widening. The professional mask cracked, replaced by a flush of embarrassment. "I need a suite," I said, my voice low and devoid of emotion. "The Hudson River view, for the foreseeable future, and I need a bottle of your best bourbon sent up immediately, no ice." "Of course, miss." She glanced at the name on the card, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Miss Rossi, my apologies. We have the Premier Suite available. I'll have the concierge escort you." Up in the room, staring out at the ink-black Hudson River and the twinkling lights of New Jersey, the reality began to set in. I poured a glass of bourbon, the amber liquid burning my throat in a pleasant, grounding way. I stripped off the black dress and left it in a heap on the floor. I walked into the bathroom, which was larger than my entire kitchen in Queens, and turned on the shower. I stood under the scalding water for an hour, scrubbing my skin until it was raw, trying to wash away 3 years of microaggressions. I tried to wash away the feeling of Mark's hand on the small of my back when he would guide me away from conversations he thought were too intellectual for me. I tried to wash away the memory of Beatrice giggling when I mispronounced a French wine label. Why did I stay so long? That was the question haunting me now, echoing off the marble tiles of the shower. Why did I endure it? Was it love, or was it a savior complex? I had convinced myself that I was the grounded, humble force that would redeem Mark from his shallow family. I thought my love was a transformative thing. How arrogant of me. You can't love someone into being a better person. You can't love someone into having a spine. I had fallen in love with his potential, not his reality. I had fallen in love with the sad architect in the diner who needed a friend, not realizing that his sadness wasn't depth. It was just self-pity. I wrapped myself in a thick, plush robe and sat on the edge of the king-sized bed. The room was silent, expensive, and lonely. I opened my laptop, my real laptop, the high-powered machine I kept hidden in a locked drawer at home, and logged into my secure server. I saw the notifications from the bank. The mortgage transfer was finalized weeks ago. The eviction notice had been filed with the county clerk this morning, timed perfectly with the dinner. I had been planning this for months, methodically, coldly. Does that make me a bad person? Does the fact that I prepared an exit strategy make my heartbreak less real? I don't think so. I think it just makes me a survivor. My email pinged. It was David, my lawyer, and the only person in the world who knew the full story. Subject: the fallout. Nina, Robert Vanderbilt just called the firm. He's screaming about fraud. I told him to direct all communication to me. They are claiming you misled them into signing over the debt. It's a baseless threat, obviously, but they are going to fight. They are going to try to drag your name through the mud. Are you ready for this? P.S. I hope you're somewhere safe. I typed back a quick reply. I'm at the Mandarin. Let them scream. They signed the papers. They took the money. They spent 3 years living on my dime while treating me like a servant. I'm not settling, David. I want them out. Every single one of them. I closed the laptop. My heart was still racing, a fluttering bird in my chest. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to call my mom. She had passed away 5 years ago, right before the tech deal closed. She never saw the money. She never saw me marry Mark. She would have hated him. I knew that now, with a piercing clarity. She was a woman who worked her hands to the bone, who taught me that dignity wasn't something you bought, it was something you forged. If she had seen Eleanor hand me a dirty plate at Thanksgiving and tell me to run it to the kitchen, dear, she would have flipped the table herself. I'm sorry, Mom, I whispered into the empty room. I tried to be good. I tried to be patient. I walked over to the window again. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the city in white. Somewhere in Westchester, in a drafty mansion that I now owned, the Vanderbilts were likely convening a war council. Eleanor was probably weeping into a handkerchief, lamenting the cruelty of the world. Mark was probably drinking his father's scotch, wondering how he missed the signs. They were the victims in their own story. They always would be. But as I watched the cars move like blood cells through the arteries of the city below, I realized something else. A heavy knot in my stomach began to loosen. I was free. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't have to worry about using the wrong fork. I didn't have to worry about my accent slipping. I didn't have to dim my light so Mark wouldn't feel overshadowed. I was Nina Rossi. I was a self-made multi-millionaire. I was brilliant, I was kind, and I was done apologizing. The conflict wasn't over, I knew that. The lawyers, the press, the inevitable messy divorce proceedings, it was all coming like a tidal wave. But for tonight, just for tonight, I was safe in my tower. And for the first time, the tower belonged to me, not some dead ancestor. I finished the bourbon, feeling the warmth spread through my limbs. I crawled into the massive bed, the sheets cool and crisp against my skin. I didn't think I would sleep, but exhaustion pulled at me like a tide. As I drifted off, my last thought wasn't of Mark or Eleanor or the house. It was of the look on the receptionist's face when I put the card down. That moment of recognition, that shift. See me, I thought. Finally, you all have to see me. The 30 days that followed that Christmas dinner were a blur of legal noise and desperate flailing. It was like watching a beetle stuck on its back, legs kicking frantically at the air, waiting for the inevitable crush of the boot. My lawyer, David, was a fortress. He fielded the calls from Robert's hastily hired legal team, cheap strip mall lawyers who tried to argue coercion, fraud, emotional distress. They threw everything at the wall, hoping something would stick. Nothing did. The documentation was ironclad. I had bought the debt legally, I had paid the taxes legally, and the foreclosure process was standard procedure. The Vanderbilts weren't fighting a Waitress anymore. They were fighting a corporation with infinite resources. And for the first time in their lives, their last name wasn't enough to save them. I stayed in the hotel suite, watching the snow turn to gray slush on the streets below. I didn't hide exactly, but I curated my existence. I bought new clothes, sharp blazers, silk blouses, boots that clicked with authority. I stopped wearing my hair in that messy bun Mark used to say was cute, but really just meant unthreatening. I wore it down, sleek and straight. I was shedding Nina the waitress like a snake shedding dead skin. But beneath the makeover, I was grieving. I was grieving the death of a dream. I had wanted a family so badly. I had wanted to belong. And in my desperation for connection, I had allowed myself to be treated like an accessory to someone else's life. The deadline arrived on a Tuesday, a bleak, overcast Tuesday in late January where the sky looked like a bruised peach. I didn't have to go to the estate. David advised against it. He said the sheriff and the movers would handle the eviction. But I needed to see it. I needed the visual confirmation that the monster under my bed was gone. I needed to walk through those doors one last time, not as a guest, not as a servant, but as the owner. When I pulled up the winding driveway, the first thing I saw were the moving trucks. 3 massive vans, their back doors gaping open like hungry mouths, swallowing the Vanderbilt legacy box by box. I parked my car, a new one, a sleek black SUV that felt like a tank, right in front of the fountain. The fountain was dry, filled with dead leaves. Fitting. I walked up the steps. The front door was propped open with a bust of some long-dead ancestor. The house smelled different. The cloying perfume was gone, replaced by the scent of dust, packing tape, and anxiety. I walked into the grand foyer and stopped. It was empty. The rugs were rolled up. The paintings were gone, leaving pale rectangular ghosts on the wallpaper where they had hung for decades. Nina. The voice came from the living room. I turned. Mark was standing there. He looked eroded. That's the only word for it. He hadn't shaved in days, his eyes were red-rimmed, and he was wearing a wrinkled polo shirt that hung loosely on his frame. He was holding a box of books. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the man I had met in the diner, the sad, lost boy. But the empathy didn't come this time. It was blocked by a wall of cold, hard reality. "You came," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm here for the final walkthrough," I said, checking my watch. "You have until noon. It's 11:45. He put the box down on the floor with a heavy thud. He took a step toward me, his hands open in a pleading gesture. "Nina, please, Is this really necessary? Kicking us out? This house, it's been in the family for 4 generations. My grandfather built that library. My height chart is carved into the pantry doorframe. You're erasing us. I'm not erasing you, Mark, I said, stepping back to maintain the distance between us. I'm evicting you. There's a difference. You erased us. You erased me every time you let your mother make a joke about my education. You erased me every time you let them treat me like staff in my own home. You chose the house over me 1,000 times. Now you lose both. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. I was scared, he whispered. I was scared of losing them. They're my family. And I was your wife, I replied softly. I was supposed to be your family. But I was just a placeholder until you found someone worthy. Well, I found my worth, Mark, and it's too expensive for you. A commotion from the dining room interrupted us. I heard a sharp, keening wail. I walked past Mark, my heels clicking loudly on the hardwood. In the dining room, Eleanor was sitting in one of the remaining high-backed chairs. She was clutching a silver tea set to her chest, rocking back and forth. Beatrice was trying to pry it from her hands, looking exhausted and terrified. When Eleanor saw me, she froze. The wailing stopped, replaced by a look of pure, distilled venom. You, she hissed. She stood up, shaky but fueled by rage. You thief! You gutter rat! You tricked us! You came into our home, ate our food, and plotted this the whole time. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. I didn't see a matriarch. I didn't see a powerful woman. I saw a sad, bitter bully who had never worked a day in her life and was terrified of a world where her last name wasn't a currency. The fear in her eyes was palpable. She wasn't angry because I was a waitress. She was angry because I had exposed her. I had paid her bills. I had proven that the gutter rat was the only thing keeping her afloat. I didn't trick you, Eleanor, I said calmly. I saved you for 3 years. You lived in luxury because I wrote checks. You insulted me while eating food I paid for. You mocked my clothes while wearing jewelry I saved from the pawn shop. The only trick here is that you convinced yourself you were better than me simply because you were born in this house and I was born in a walk-up. I walked over to the table and placed a hand on the wood. You called me a gold digger. Do you remember? At Christmas, you asked how much it would cost to make me go away. I smiled, a sad, tired smile. Turns out the price was exactly the amount of your mortgage. I bought my freedom. And I bought this house just to show you that dignity cannot be inherited. It has to be earned. And you are bankrupt. Eleanor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She slumped back into the chair, the silver teapot clattering to the floor. She looked small, defeated. I felt no joy in it, just a profound sense of finality. Take the tea set, I said to Beatrice, who was staring at me with wide, fearful eyes. Take whatever you can carry. The locks change at noon. I turned and walked out. I passed Mark in the hallway. He was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. He reached out a hand as I passed, his fingers grazing the sleeve of my coat. Nina, I loved you. In my own way, I did. I paused at the door, my hand on the brass knob. I looked back at him one last time. The house loomed around him, dark and cavernous, a mausoleum for a life that never really existed. I know, Mark, I said. You loved me like you loved this house. You loved how I made you look. You loved that I kept you warm. But you never checked the foundation, and you never fixed the leaks. I walked out into the cold winter air. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, casting a pale, watery light over the estate. I walked to my car, got in, and locked the doors. I watched in the rearview mirror as the movers loaded the last few boxes. I watched Mark help his mother down the stairs, her frail figure leaning heavily on him. They looked like refugees from a war they had started themselves. As I drove away, down the long driveway and through the iron gates, I felt a physical release in my chest. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my sternum for 3 years unspooled. I didn't keep the house. I couldn't. It was poisoned ground. A week later, I sold it to a developer who planned to turn the land into affordable housing units. I liked the poetry of that. The Vanderbilt estate, a monument to exclusion, would become a home for hundreds of families who actually needed it. I took the proceeds from the sale and the repayment of the debt because, yes, I made sure the sale covered every cent I had spent on them, and I started a grant program for women in the service industry who wanted to start their own businesses. I called it the Apron Fund. I'm sitting in the Rusty Spoon now as I record this final part of the story. I'm not working here, but I'm at my old booth, booth 4. The duct tape is still there. I'm drinking black coffee and watching the rain streak the window. People walk by outside, heads down against the wind, everyone fighting their own invisible battles. I learned something brutal and beautiful in that house. I learned that silence is not a virtue. I used to think that enduring pain quietly made me strong. I thought that if I just took the high road, if I just smiled and paid the bills and absorbed the insults, eventually they would see my light. But they didn't. They just used the light to see their own reflections more clearly. I learned that you cannot buy respect, and you certainly cannot earn it from people who are committed to misunderstanding you. The biggest lie I told wasn't about the money. It was the lie I told myself, that I could be small enough to fit into Mark's world without disappearing completely. We think that love requires sacrifice, and it does, but it should never require the sacrifice of your self-respect. It should never require you to apologize for who you are. So, to anyone listening who feels like they're shrinking to fit into someone else's life, who feels like they're paying the mortgage on a relationship that is emotionally bankrupt, check the deed. See whose name is really on the lease of your life. And if it's not yours, pack your bags. Or, better yet, hand them an envelope. I'm Nina. I used to be a waitress. I used to be a wife. Now I'm just the woman who paid the bill and walked out the door. And let me tell you, the air out here, it's never smelled sweeter.